Welcome back to Behind the Play. My name is Alex Adams, and I am joined by my boss at the Women's Hockey News, the one and only Ian Kennedy, who has a pretty cool book coming out. So thanks so much for taking the time and also for believing in me and having me cover the PWHL in the first year. And it's really great to have you on. And maybe you want to maybe kind of it's your time to sell the book and kind of explain what drew you to writing a book about women's hockey.
Yeah, so the book, thanks for having me, is titled "Ice in Their Veins: Women's Relentless Pursuit of the Puck," and it really is a look at the long history of women's hockey. I've said a couple of times already in talking about the book that women's hockey right now has reached new heights, but it's not that women's hockey is new. It's been around for 130 years, and there's so many incredible stories that we don't know, and a lot of that has been historic erasure or exclusion of women and the barriers that existed. But some of the institutions like the Hockey Hall of Fame haven't quite caught up in recognizing that past of women in the sport and the building that they've done. But they've been around playing the game since the 1800s, and the book looks at that history, but it also talks about those the barriers, the exclusion, the misogyny, and the backlash that women faced to play the game, to get into leagues, the court battles they had to fight, and doing that, we use stories basically of so many of those women. Whoever was still alive was thrilled to be a part of the book. Hockey Hall of Famer Geraldine Heaney wrote the foreword. Olympic gold medalist Sammy Joe Small wrote the afterword, and pretty much everybody in between. Some of the people that provided some praise that you'll find inside the cover or on the back cover are like Hockey Hall of Famers Cami Granado and Natalie Darwitz, Angela Ruggiero. It's kind of a who's who of the women's hockey world in terms of who took part in this project. But they were all excited to have those stories finally told. There's been some women's hockey books out in the past, but not really for uh, over 20 years. So this is a nice chance with the PWHL as such a incredible moment in the women's game to kind of bring it all together and show people exactly how we got here, and kind of the shoulders that people are standing on right now, introducing the people that built it all up.
I guess with that, my for me, the curiosity stems from was that for you to begin the process of collecting everything and going into like when did that start for you?
It's been probably 3 years on this project. I started it while I was finishing my past book, but how it kind of came to be was I was researching something completely different and opened an old newspaper, and I saw this story about a woman named Marion Coveney, who is turned out to be the first ever captain of Team Canada's national team in 1987. Before there was a world championship, they had a unofficial world women's tournament that year that they tried to make into a world championship, but Hockey Canada wouldn't sanction it. USA Hockey wouldn't sanction it. The IIHF wouldn't sanction it. So they put on the tournament anyways. Fran Ryder, who's the Ontario Women's Hockey Association's president, was integral in all that. But Marion Coveney turned out to be from my same little tiny hometown of less than 10,000 people. And I'd never heard her name before. And so I thought, how is it possible that I grew up in the same town as Team Canada's first ever captain, and I've never heard her name before?
Hmm.
Um, so, if she was a man, we would have had arenas named after her. We would have had signs at the entrance to our town saying home of Marion Coveney, and everyone would have known about her. She would have been in the Hockey Hall of Fame probably. And uh, unfortunately, by the time I got around to finding her, she was in a stage 4 battle with pancreatic cancer,
Hmm.
and I interviewed her with the help of her partner at the point, with just over a month left in her life. And actually, it turned out that the first magazine article that I wrote for the Hockey News was about her life. And
Hmm.
so it kind of all came full circle. But when I found her and I found out about her, and I went down this rabbit hole of researching it, it just started me off on, if I didn't know about her and I was from the same town, a little, out of the way place in Southern Ontario, and I had never heard of her. How many other people have we not heard of, and how many other teams have we not heard of? And why, as someone that devoured every last bit of hockey history, I'd spend hours laying on my stomach on my living room floor reading the backs of hockey cards and reading the hockey news and flipping through all these hockey almanacs I'd get for Christmas every year.
Hmm.
But I never really heard about women. And the only person I'd ever heard of was Manon Rhéaume. And that was just a brief snippet until the 98 Olympics, basically. But before that, I knew nothing. And that's wrong. And as someone that loves hockey so much, I should have known more. And so I thought the book was really important to do that and to kind of talk about those issues as someone that came from strictly a men's hockey side of things. All the other things that I was taught about women in hockey as well, and the stereotypes and the discrimination, and just to be really open about my part in some of those negative things as well, and to set a new path forward.
Hmm. I guess with that, like after you kind of the idea came to your mind, what was the next steps in writing this book, and what was that process like for you in writing the book?
The next step was finding people. But usually, once you find one or two people, it's never hard to find more because I'd get into these conversations with women from that played in the 1960s or 70s or the 90s, and they would say, "Well, you got to talk to so and so," and usually they'd find me a contact, and I'd talk to the next person, and they say, "Well, if you haven't talked to this person, you got to talk to them." But beyond that, hours of wearing white gloves in old newspaper stacks in
Hmm.
libraries and museums and things like that. And just collecting stories until there was a point where I felt like I had enough to start putting it together. There was a couple of quintessential events I really wanted to talk about in there. There was that 1987 Women's World Tournament because it's kind of been forgotten because of its unofficial status. And then in 1967, if you go back before that, even there was a couple of girls' hockey tournaments that popped up in Ontario. One of them being in that same hometown in
Hmm.
Wallaceburg, Ontario, the Lipstick Tournament, which was the first and longest continuously running women's hockey tournament in Canada for 3 decades almost. And the Brampton Canadettes tournament at the time. And those events really became a meeting place for women across Canada and the US, where because they didn't have as many formal leagues, there was no governing body that would watch over women's hockey at the time. They would meet at those tournaments and they would plan and they'd organize and they would discuss what should be happening and what problems they were facing. And it really started kind of catalyzed the growth to the 90s where we got the world championships and the Olympics, and then into the attempts at professionalism until today. So a long spiraling story of talking to as many people as possible. The book itself really, uh, of course, there's lots of Canadian content, but there's also tons of American content. Um, and right through to some European stories as well from uh, and a Japanese story as well for people that
Hmm.
were playing the game in the 70s and 80s and 90s trying to find their way to finding leagues and to finding ice to be on and to not being barred from rinks because of their sex or their gender. So
Hmm.
it's really just kind of took on a passion project, I guess, as it went on, and here we are.
I guess with that, with the league coming together, the PWHL, and obviously you would know even more at a much better level, kind of the understanding of the previous leagues than I would. But how much did that kind of help escalate your kind of maybe the intensity for you to have a book like this to almost give someone the almanac or the history of this of women's hockey that isn't just beginning on what was it, January 2nd or 3rd of 2024 when the PWHL began?
Well, strangely enough, I had finished the book right before the PWHL was announced. So
Hmm.
when it was announced, we had to kind of stop and go back and make some edits, I guess, because something really significant had just happened. So
Hmm.
it was planned to come out a little bit earlier, but when the PWHL was launched, there was some ties that had to be made there. Of course, some of the stories like Jana Hefford was a person that I interviewed for the book and got her life history and background and things like that, and she was so integral in this. But I interviewed some of the people from the past iterations, John and Joanna Boynton from the PHF that ran that league. Sammy Joe Small was one of the founders and leaders of the Canadian Women's Hockey League, and many of the women that I spoke to before that played in the original National Women's Hockey League from the early 2000s, and then so many others played in the Central Ontario Women's Hockey League before that, which was probably the best league in the world for a long time. So we really went back through everything and
Hmm.
tried to piece it together so that we showed a timeline, but without it being, I don't love reading nonfiction books. I'll put that out there, even though I write them. I find kind of they can become stat heavy and date heavy. And this history is really seen through the eyes of the players that lived it.
Hmm.
Uh, and I know it's not, um, I can be very honest. Probably a man writing this is not the ideal situation either. So I
Hmm.
always approach things as a story preservationist, not a storyteller. And I approached it as me being very honest. You'll see snippets at the beginning of every chapter, pretty much that talk about my own experience in hockey and what I learned about masculinity or women's place in hockey and society from whether it was my school, my coaches, church, whatever had impacted me. I'll tell a story in each one about the bad part of the game that I was part of for a long time, and tying it back to the issues that are in there that could be positive. But um, the PWHL though is a story that really I hope is kind of the final chapter of what I wrote and the first chapter of what someone else is going to write.
Hmm.
Uh, and so that, I think the very last page of the actual book ends with the puck drop of the first PWHL game at Mattamy Arena, and that was to me just a fitting spot because I knew that these next year, 2 years, 10 years were going to be filled with so many incredible things that I could have just kept adding and adding and adding, but it felt like a good moment of this is the end of what was, and we're starting fresh here with what will be.
I guess with that, why do you think it took so long for, you've done the research, you've talked to people, you've archived what's happened in the past. Why did it take so long? And I don't want to diminish predecessors, leagues that did, have their own versions of success, but nothing like the PWHL. Why do you think the PWHL took off in the way it did, at least for season one?
Well, the time was right. There was a lot of other leagues that had really laid some groundwork, whether it was the WNBA or the National Women's Soccer League, that had had just incredible success. But the appetite for women's sports has grown immensely down to the NCAA level, youth sports in Canada. People are watching and people are wanting to watch. And the problem before was that there was no way to watch and there was no coverage. And when I took on the role of with the Hockey News of doing women's hockey coverage primarily to now exclusively, it was really with the idea that there was no outlet out there that was doing everyday, robust, comprehensive coverage like you'd see with TSN or Sportsnet or the Hockey News for men's hockey. But we didn't have that. Sure, we covered women's hockey, but it wasn't to the same extent. You couldn't find a game summary. You couldn't find trade rumors. You couldn't find draft rankings. It just didn't exist before. Um, and seeing those things, I I took on that role before the PWHL was announced again, thinking, maybe we'll help build to that point. Um, but the situation, the environment was just really right for the PWHL, and it really the last step was getting rid of the division that existed in women's hockey because regardless of how we want to talk about this, there was significant division between multiple groups of players, primarily the PWHPA and uh, everyone else, I guess, would be the easiest way to put it. And once the decision and the discussions were taken off the table from those groups, and the merger was just done, it was really quick and easy. And we saw how quickly those two groups who had the exact same goals, just with different ideas of how to get there, could come together and could build something incredible together. And there still is probably a lot of lasting hurt and um, some issues from different groups and people who believe they have more power and try and kind of wield that in ways that are inappropriate. But overall, I don't think anyone, you know, would have expected sold out arenas every night and the massive viewership that we saw on every online platform that there was. And I think it's completely set up for uh, exponential growth moving forward, yeah, which is something that has never existed. We only really got this excitement once every 4 years with the Olympics, and now we're kind of getting it every, well, I guess now every October, well, as we look forward to a new season each year.
I with that for you, obviously you talk about the environment and you can look across like the Women's World Cup did the best it's ever done before with ratings. Obviously Caitlin Clark and the WNBA and they just wrapped up their finals a couple days ago. But outside of the environment, do you think that's the sole kind of proprietor of that growth in the first year and that we saw sold out? Or what else was there? How else did the league facilitate, a really successful first season?
Well, really, a lot of different things. One of the biggest ones is that finally we had someone that put in a humongous investment financially, which involved uh, incredible lengths to market the sport by forming partnerships, corporate sponsors, and other pretty much every avenue. They open it up so that everyone could watch the games for free on YouTube. I mean, before that, people were probably illegally streaming some kind of cam or pinhole camera to watch a women's hockey game. It just didn't exist, or you were getting, these really unprofessional coverages of games, whether it was the announcers or the quality of video or the weird angles that cut off parts of the game. They got a lot of those things right in terms of media coverage, in terms of accessibility to see the games, in terms of the, I mean, people criticize the branding, but um, the PWHL was just recognized as having one of the top brand awareness and brand trust uh, values in Canada. And I think a lot of that was because they didn't have team names. We had to say the word PWHL, the acronym PWHL, over and over and over with all six teams, with the league itself, with the drafts. The word P or the phrase acronym PWHL was said repeatedly. And I think people really heard about it because we didn't have the Toronto Scepters. We had PWHL Toronto. And there was a lot of things that just played into that favor. But, having people like Billie Jean King as well, that has such a name recognition, those things all really helped. But it was just that magical combination of people being ready, society being ready, money being there, the visibility. It kind of all combined into this feverish desire for people to see the games to the point where we were seeing, like Toronto had to move out of their arena for the playoffs because they just had so much demand, and that's I think that's unheard of, really, to see a league have to pivot mid-season and pull teams out of different markets or different venues to open it up to more people.
You talked about the exponential growth of this league and that you see it going in that direction for hopefully years to come. what should be the goal for this league heading into year two to grow, to not just stay where they were, but to really capture more fans? What do you think some of the things they need to do this season to really achieve that?
One of the biggest things that I think was still a shortcoming in year one is that we don't see a lot of, I mean, they've started some community outreach now with grassroots hockey programs. That's a great thing. But I still think there's a lot to do with the league for diversity and inclusion. We don't see a lot of, uh, I mean, a big proportion of the PWHL's fan base are what the NHL would consider their non-traditional hockey fans, or that they would consider their a group that they would want to try and find a way to market to that already loves the PWHL. But I know that they hired Soraya Tinker last year to kind of oversee some of that diversity and inclusion efforts, but we don't see a lot of policies from the league yet. We don't see a lot of rules that would or you know goals that they've set that would help open up the game to more people because Hockey Canada released earlier, actually, just today, this a paper on how to get more women and girls into the sport of hockey, how to keep them in the sport of hockey, how to make it more enjoyable and safe for them, and to remove the still long-standing barriers that are there. So for the PWHL to continue to grow, I really think they're going to have to reach into those hockey local organizations and lend a hand, whether that's financially, in terms of running camps, offering up, group incentives to bring more young girls to the game, and finding ways to entice newcomers to Canada and the United States to become involved in the game as well, and to really remain an LGBTQ plus friendly sports community, which, there's a definite large percentage of the fan base that would fall into that community. So those are a couple of the main things. There's, expansion would be a wonderful thing. Hopefully after next year would be probably the ideal time. I don't think they should go too big too soon. I think probably two teams is plenty for the foreseeable future. And, other things too, I guess, there is still work to be done to build a few of those markets out. I think that we saw Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Minnesota, really, really strong fan bases. Boston did pretty well considering they were in Lowell. If they could get more games in Boston, I think they'd probably see more growth. But I think the league will really be focused this year on the New York Sirens to make them a viable, growing market and fan base, because that was a considerable struggle in year one, bouncing the team between Connecticut to Long Island to New Jersey. There's really no way to build a fan base when you've got three different home venues that are all more than an hour apart. That's like a road game in a lot of NHL, Major League Baseball, NFL games. That's asking a lot from fans to buy season tickets and then have to drive 2 hours in every direction to get to home
Mhm.
games.
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess maybe tracking back a little bit because, it has been a monumental year for the game of women's hockey. And I guess for you, with, all the history behind us, and sometimes, they say like the best way to look at the future is to examine the past. And I'm curious with this league, how do you think it's changed women's hockey forever, and how will it become kind of like what do you see the lasting effects of this league for the future of women's hockey?
I just think being able to see the game is so important. You're going to see, talking to Jana Hefford about the significance of the launch of the league several months ago, she mentioned that, the biggest boom in women's hockey registration that had ever happened was following the 1998 Olympics. And she believed that the PWHL, because of the visibility, because of the fact that it wasn't just a 2-week tournament, because of the fact that it's in multiple locations, would see an even greater explosion in terms of the registrations for girls and women in hockey. And not just, we're not just talking about 6 or 7-year-old girls joining hockey. We're talking about 40 or 50-year-old women that never really saw their space in the game that now see themselves represented in this league, um, getting back into the game, or maybe trying to learn to play activity or promotion to join a rec league, because there's tons and tons of
Yeah.
women's rec leagues out there that are probably going to see a huge boost now as well. And those are all things that are going to slowly over time build fans, because as generations and as more parents get into the league, they'll teach their kids about the league. And we're talking the importance of this also being young boys seeing women playing professional as well, not just young girls, because I think that will really be a valuable um, portion of fighting hockey's cultural problems, by seeing these very strong, powerful, talented women playing professionally on TV, on all streaming platforms, on our social media. We see the clips of whatever's happened the night before, and seeing the game played the way that it was traditionally played. I mean, people think of women's hockey sometimes as non-contact. It's always had body contact and body checking returning. Body checking was a absolutely legal, regular thing until 1992. So
Hmm.
for, you know, 100 years, women played full contact hockey. Quite often there were fights. It was, the hockey that everyone really knows. But it was only taken out at that point, trying to find some parity for developing nations internationally. So, um, I think that the long term, though, as you asked, is just going to be that visibility where, um, like, my child is never going to live in a world where she doesn't know that women play professional hockey and that she can't see it. And the number of times that I turned on a game last year and she'd say, "Daddy, are those girls?" And I'd say, "Yes, they are. That's women playing hockey." And
Hmm.
then I'd turn on an NHL game a night later and she'd say, "Daddy, are those girls?" And I'd say, "No." And she'd say, "Turn it off." Like she didn't want to see it anymore. It was great. It was like
Yeah.
so good to
Yeah.
see that excitement and just a level of like understanding of like, no, that, NHL's not for me. I've got the thing that I want to watch. I want to see people like me playing professionally. And that was so cool. So having that where, her generation is going to see this, and even teenagers now that are playing, they are going to step onto the ice this season and say, maybe someday I'll be in the PWHL.
Yeah.
And before this year, it was maybe someday I will go to college and play. And nobody knew what was next after that. There was the PWHPA and the PHF and some European leagues, but there was never a sure thing, and none of them paid. Well, the PHF was at the end, but really there wasn't a lot of opportunities that are going to continue to grow now with this new league.
How do you think maybe the game will just maybe expedite in terms of its talent and skills just with the platform for these women to, the best of the best to be playing every day? And I know covering the league last year for maybe the first month or two, just talking to players and they're saying, yeah, I used to just be in, on the ice by myself training and with no one or me and, three other women are training in wherever, but it's not really conducive to allowing for you to maximize your skills. How much do you think? And on top of that, as you know, the draft that came in, this league's going to be better just talent wise this season. But how much do you think now, maybe in 5 years from now, that just the talent, the skill, everything is just going to skyrocket because of their having a sustainable, consistent league?
It's going to be monumental. I think we really haven't even scratched the surface of will there be other Marie-Philippe Poulins coming? She's been around. There's always going to be these generational talents that find the way to be there, regardless of whether there's a league or not. But we're going to see the depth of women's hockey really grow, and the skill level is already. I mean, I've been watching a lot of U18 games to uh, already start kind of picking out prospects that are coming up and things like that, and looking at that next wave. And some of the players that are coming out of those leagues right now, I think, skill wise, are already at that kind of elite level. It's just going to be the growing their physicality and their maturity, and learning to play the game at quicker and quicker paces over the next few years. But we've got players that are uh, 16, 17, 18, 19 right now that are just lights out, like the Chloe Primeranos of the world that are, but she's just one of many. I mean, she's got a lot of conversation recently, deservedly so, but there are players coming, not just from Canada, but all over that are
Mm.
really going to shock people when they get to this league. And there's going to be a lot of wow moments with some of the players that come in there that are going to drop jaws quite literally. It is like that Caitlin Clark effect, right?
Mhm.
I mean, the WNBA has been around for decades now, and we are just getting these players still that we talk about being potentially best evers. The NHL, I mean, if you put Connor McDavid in the physicality and the technology that he wears, for equipment and the training and the nutrition that he's had, if you could time travel him back 20 years ago, he'd score 400 points a season. It wouldn't be the Gretzky 200.
Mm.
He's incredible, and we're going to keep getting these players every year in men's and women's hockey because training methodologies have improved. But we're also talking about the removal of barriers for women, where there's more money going into their programming, where they're getting better ice time. I mean, gyms banned women until 40 years ago too. So there's no the opportunity to improve women's hockey with training and nutrition and adequate ice time and skills camp and now having agents and advisors watching over that and seeing and helping them get to these different camps and trainers and coaches that might be there. We're going to see the boom of women's hockey, the skill level continue to increase even after we get all of the best on best in the world into the league, which is still probably a year or two away until um, everyone that's currently in that best of the world category is in this league.
Why do you think that hasn't happened yet? Is it just the adjustment to women overseas being
Yeah,
like,
contracts overseas, there's still several players over there. I look at the Yeni Hirakovskis and the Michelle Carvinens that if they weren't under contract could be in the league right now. Vivi Vainica, who will be a first round pick this year in the PWHL. There's this group of players from Europe that have been tied up with contracts that will expire after this year. But there's also a group of players that I don't know if they'll force the PWHL to look differently at draft ages in the future too, but like Caroline Harvey is still a couple years away. Layla Edwards is a couple years away. There's a dozen national team members in the NCAA right now who we know are better than a dozen players in the PWHL right now. So until we figure out how that's all going to look moving forward, and if alterations happen to draft eligibility, if they get rid of the draft altogether, like we saw with the National Women's Soccer League,
Mhm.
then we would see players really having control over their own destiny and choosing when they become a part of this league because there are so many good players out there that would make this league just uh, really difficult to play in at the moment if they could all get there.
well, maybe transitioning into the league this season for you, what are maybe the storylines that you see heading into the second season of the PWHL?
I'll get the one out of the way. There's cleanup to do in Minnesota still. I think that's going to be a story that we're going to have to watch how fans react in particular. I think that's still just a big question mark about who really has power, how the league's overseeing that issue. I don't care that we haven't talked about it for a month now. The same issue is still there that was there. Um, and somehow the league's going to have to get that under control. I'd imagine a lot of that's already happened behind the scenes, but as fans and as media, we're still going to have to watch that play out. The other side of that, one of the big things that I'll personally be watching is how Toronto manages all of that talent that they've brought in up front. I know, especially with Natalie Spooner coming back, if she can stick to that timeline that she's talking about for being ready for the season opener, they've got four lines where their fourth line would probably be anybody else's third line and probably some other people's second line right now. Just an immense amount of talent there. But I'm also really excited to see some of these rookies coming to the league. I know that Sarah Fillier, there's been a lot of talk recently about how come it took so long for a contract to come this summer. But I think it'll be exciting to see what she can do in New York and if she can help settle that franchise down and make them more competitive this year. But I can think of a dozen different storylines that I think are really exciting. Even on the fan side of things, seeing the growth of those markets as we've moved into bigger venues in Montreal and in Toronto, um, and the New York franchise moving exclusively to New Jersey. Um, those, along with I really want to see as well what the neutral sites are this year, because I
Yeah.
think that um, as much as they're just neutral site games. They're not just neutral site games. I think everybody understands that those are always going to be test games for expansion in the future. And I don't think it's any secret that Detroit and Pittsburgh from last year would be considered two of those. I would be really shocked if there weren't more Canadian neutral site games this year
Mm.
that are outside of NHL venues in the current markets. Because I think the league probably saw how successful the three Canadian franchises were and might want to get a little bit more of that market share there. But those are some of the things that I'm really excited to see
Mm.
off the bat, and also how the 30 game season looks, because I think that's we all wanted more last year, and I think we still want more, but we're not going to get it until there's expansion, I would imagine.
Mm.
But I'm excited to see how the momentum keeps up through the international breaks and through that new section of games that we're going to get here before the new year.
I'm maybe just curious about the number of games because, as you mentioned, I thought it'd be, a bit more than 30, and it felt like, as you said, last season, 24 was too little, and people were itching for more. So, how did the league settle on 30 games as the amount of games for this season?
Well, really, the 30 games, it's kind of a thing that was outlined in the collective bargaining agreement that they weren't going to go above a certain number. And I think that we won't see that even be able to change until expansion does occur, because there wasn't talk of how anything would adapt. The collective bargaining agreement doesn't really mention anything about that, which why would it? Because it's negotiating on things that don't exist, kind of imaginary circumstances. But I don't think we'll see anything more than that. I think it was probably in year one, time constraints, venue constraints, and trying to keep costs down for travel and things like that as well, until all of those issues were kind of ironed out. But I would love to see more. I know that everyone else would. At some point, though, you probably don't want to see, Ottawa and Toronto playing 10 times a season for a 60 game year. It's probably just too much. So, would 36 be great? I think I would love 36. It sounds like a good even number of 6 times per team, 3 and 3.
Hmm.
Uh, because right now, if you do the math, you're going to play an uneven home schedule and road schedule against certain teams. So finding a way to even that out might be a little bit better, but there's it's exciting. There's so many options for what we're going to see, and more games the better, in my opinion. I think most fans are like that right now too.
Well, Ian, thanks so much for taking the time and doing this, and I'm really excited to devour your book when it comes out. Maybe just before I let you go, maybe just one last time for you to plug the book and maybe the stuff at the Hockey News that we're doing, and just yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for your daily coverage, you can go to thehockeynews.com/women's and get up-to-date stories on the PWHL, college hockey, European hockey prospects. We're doing it all. And of course, the book is out everywhere you get your books. Ice in Their Veins, Women's Relentless Pursuit of the Puck. You can find it at your local bookstore. And if they don't have it, you can request it and they'll get it for you. Otherwise, you can get it online in Canada at Chapters or Indigo or Amazon or at my publishing company, tidewaterpress.ca. It's always nice to support independent publishers and bookstores too. So feel free to go out and get it. And I'd love to hear what everyone thinks about it.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to be reading, and thanks so much for taking the time and doing this. It's going to be an exciting PWHL season, and I'm excited for all the coverage at the Hockey News, and then as well your book as well. But thanks so much for doing this, Ian.
Thanks for having me, Alex.